June 4th, 1942, dawn breaks over the vast Pacific, a deceptive calm masking the storm to come. On the bridge of the aircraft carrier Akagi, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands rigid, his eyes scanning the horizon through salt-crusted binoculars. The air is thick with the hum of engines and the sharp tang of aviation fuel as his strike force, 4 mighty carriers, battleships, and cruisers steams toward Midway Atoll. Nagumo, a seasoned commander with the weight of empire on his shoulders, feels a flicker of unease. Just hours earlier, reconnaissance reports had trickled in, vague and incomplete, but something gnaws at him. Is the American fleet truly absent, as intelligence assured? Or is this the trap he's dreaded since Pearl Harbor shattered the world 6 months ago? In the shadow of that infamous December attack, Japan had surged across the Pacific like a tidal wave, claiming the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies in a blitz of conquest. But now, with resources stretched thin and the United States reeling yet resilient, Yamamoto's grand plan for Midway promised to crush the remnants of the American carrier force, securing dominance from Hawaii to Australia. For Nagumo, leading the first air fleet, success meant glory for the Emperor. Failure, the unraveling of it all. As planes roar off the decks in the first wave toward the tiny atoll, he mutters to his staff, "The enemy must not suspect our approach." Little does he know, in the dim-lit code rooms of Hawaii, American cryptographers have already pierced the veil, turning Japan's ambush into their own deadly counterstroke. The lives of thousands, sailors, pilots, families back home, hang in the balance as the ocean awakens to the thunder of war. As the first wave of 108 Japanese aircraft, bombers, fighters, torpedo planes, vanishes into the morning haze toward Midway, Nagumo allows himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The strike is perfectly timed. The Americans on the atoll will be caught unprepared, their runways cratered before they can launch a meaningful counterattack. Below decks, armorers and deck crews swarm over the hangars, rearming the reserve aircraft with torpedoes. Intelligence has insisted the American carriers are nowhere near, some still licking wounds in Pearl Harbor, others far to the south. Nagumo's orders are clear. If enemy carriers are spotted, switch instantly to anti-ship weapons. But for now, the plan holds. High explosive bombs for land targets remain loaded. Then at 07 so, the tone float plane from the cruiser Tone breaks radio silence. Its delayed report crackles across the flagship. Sight what appears to be 10 enemy surface ships. Nagumo's chief of staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, leans forward sharply. 10 ships, but what kind? Carriers, battleships, cruisers. The pilot promises a follow-up sighting. Minutes crawl by like hours. Nagumo paces the bridge, the weight of command pressing harder. He has already committed half his air strength to Midway. If American carriers are out there, his reserve strike must be ready to hit them with torpedoes, not bombs. But changing armament now risks chaos on the crowded decks and leaves Midway's defenses intact. At 0728, the float plane reports again. Enemy force accompanied by what appears to be a carrier. The words land like a shell burst. Kusaka turns to Nagumo, voice low but urgent. "We must rearm the reserve aircraft immediately." Nagumo hesitates. The first wave is already pounding Midway. Reports from the strike leader, Lieutenant Tomonaga, indicate heavy damage but fierce resistance, enemy fighters rising to intercept. Tomonaga's own plane is damaged, fuel leaking, yet he presses the attack. Nagumo knows the atoll must be neutralized. But now, somewhere beyond the horizon, an American carrier lurks. One carrier or more? The Admiral's mind races through the possibilities. Launch the reserve force half-armed with bombs? Wait for full confirmation? The deck crews stand ready. Hoses and carts poised between bomb racks and torpedo storage. Every minute of indecision brings the unseen enemy closer. Nagumo finally gives the order. Recover the Midway strike first, then rearm everything for ships. But even as the words leave his mouth, the vast Pacific seems to tighten around the fleet like a noose. By 0820, the sky above Nagumo's fleet is alive with returning aircraft. Lieutenant Tomonaga's first wave limps back from midway, fuel-starved. Zeros weaving through clouds. Val dive bombers trailing smoke. Kate torpedo planes riddled with bullet holes. Tomonaga himself circles Akagi once, signaling desperately, low on fuel, requesting immediate landing. Nagumo grants it. One by one the planes thud onto the decks of Akagi. Hyuga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Deck crews rush forward with hoses and stretchers, pulling wounded pilots from cockpits, while others refuel and rearm the survivors for a possible second strike on the atoll. Below in the sweltering hangars, chaos reigns. Nagumo's earlier order stands. Unload the high-explosive bombs, switch to torpedoes and armor-piercing rounds for the reported American carrier. Bombs are manhandled off wings and trolleys, stacked haphazardly along bulkheads. Torpedoes, heavy, delicate, deadly, are hauled up from magazines. Fuel lines snake across the decks, pumping aviation gasoline into hungry tanks. The air reeks of cordite and petrol. A single spark could turn each carrier into a floating inferno. But there is no time for caution. On Akagi's bridge, the tension is palpable. Captain Taijiro Aoki, Nagumo's flagship commander, watches the recovery with growing anxiety. "We are exposed," he says quietly to Kusaka. "No combat air patrol worth the name. Most of our fighters are escorting the midway strike or landing." Now, Kusaka nods grimly. Only a handful of Zeros orbit overhead. The fleet steams on, zigzagging at high speed, but the vast ocean offers no cover. Then at 08:55, another report from Tone's floatplane. Enemy carrier group now accompanied by 2 more carriers, 3 American carriers. The words hit Nagumo like a physical blow. Yamamoto's intelligence had promised none within 1,000 miles. Now the hunters have become the hunted. Nagumo's reserve strike, still half rearmed, scattered across 4 flight decks, is his only hope of retaliation. But the planes are not ready. The decks are clogged with returning aircraft, fuel hoses, and ordnance. Launching now would mean sending pilots into battle with whatever weapons they happen to carry, some with bombs, some with torpedoes, many with neither. Nagumo stares out at the empty horizon, his face a mask of iron control. Inside, doubt gnaws deeper. He has been outmaneuvered, outguessed. Somewhere out there, American admirals, Spruance, Fletcher, are steering their task forces into striking position. Their own decks already spotting dive bombers for launch. The admiral's hand tightens on the rail. In the hangars below, men shout over the roar of engines. Racing against time they do not yet know has already run out. At 09:17, the order finally goes out. Clear the decks for launch. Nagumo has made his choice. The reserve aircraft, now mostly, rearmed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, will strike. The American carriers as soon as the last of the returning planes are struck below. Deck crews shove fuel hoses aside, kick loose ordnance into corners, and wave frantic signals to the elevators. Planes are spotted forward in a mad rush, engines coughing to life. Pilots scramble into cockpits, faces streaked with sweat and oil, knowing they face a fight unlike any before. But the sky is no longer empty. At 9:30, lookouts on the destroyer Arashi scream warnings, enemy aircraft high overhead. Torpedo bombers, slow, lumbering devastators from the American carriers Hornet, Enterprise, and Yorktown skim the waves in desperate, uncoordinated waves. Nagumo's remaining Zeros pounce, slashing through the formations like wolves through sheep. Machine guns chatter, devastators burst into flame and plunge into the sea. Few torpedoes reach the twisting Japanese ships. Nagumo watches from the bridge, almost relieved. This attack is brave but doomed. The Americans are sacrificing their torpedo squadrons to draw the Japanese fighters low. He does not yet see the real danger. High above the dogfight, unseen against the bright morning clouds, 3 squadrons of dauntless dive bombers led by Clarence McCluskey from Enterprise, Maxwell Leslie from Yorktown, and Wade McCluskey's wingmen circle patiently. Their commanders have spent precious minutes searching the ocean, fuel gauges dropping toward empty. Now at 10:20, they spot Nagumo's fleet, 4 carriers steaming in a tight box. Flight decks crammed with aircraft, fuel lines still snaking across the wood. bombs and torpedoes stacked like cordwood. On Akagi's bridge, a lookout suddenly shouts, "Dive bombers!" Steep dive from astern. Nagumo spins around. The sun glints off dozens of wings as the Dauntlesses roll over and plummet almost vertically, sirens screaming like banshees. Captain Aoki bellows orders to increase speed and turn hard into the wind. Anti-aircraft guns erupt in frantic thunder, tracers arcing skyward. But the Japanese fighters are still low, chasing the last torpedo planes. The high cover is gone. The first bombs fall toward Akagi and Kaga simultaneously. Nagumo grips the compass stand, his knuckles white, as the ocean around him erupts in towering geysers. He has only seconds to realize, too late, that the ambush he planned has become his own catastrophe. 10:24 a.m., the first bomb strikes. Akagi just aft of the island superstructure. It punches through the flight deck and detonates in the packed hangar below, where dozens of fully fueled and armed aircraft wait like kindling. In an instant, the blast ignites a chain of secondary explosions, torpedoes cooking off, aviation fuel vaporizing into fireballs that race along the deck. Flames leap 50 feet high. Black smoke billows upward, blotting out the sun. Almost simultaneously, Kaga takes 4 direct hits in less than 10 seconds. Lieutenant Commander McCluskey's Dauntlesses scream down in perfect formation, their bombs walking across her deck from bow to stern. One explodes amid the parked aircraft spotted for launch. Another detonates on the bridge, killing Captain Jisaku Okada and most of his staff in a flash of orange light. Fuel lines rupture, feeding rivers of burning gasoline that pour into the open elevators. Kaga becomes a furnace. On Akagi's bridge, Nagumo stands frozen for a heartbeat as the deck tilts beneath his feet. Shrapnel whistles past. A young signalman beside him crumples, blood blooming across his white uniform. Captain Aoki grabs Nagumo's arm, shouting over the roar, "Admiral, we must abandon the bridge." But Nagumo shakes him off. He stares at the inferno spreading across his flagship, the carrier that led the strike on Pearl. Harbor now gutted in minutes. "This is my responsibility," he mutters, voice barely audible. Gusaka, blood streaming from a head wound, forces the issue. "Sir, the fleet needs you alive." Soryu, steaming a mile away, is next. Lieutenant Earl Gallagher's squadron catches her turning hard. 3,000-pound bombs slam into her flight deck and hangars. Within moments, uncontrollable fires merge into a single roaring blaze. Her captain, Ryusaku Yanagimoto, refuses to leave his ship, choosing to go down with her as tradition demands. Hiryu alone, positioned farther north, escapes the first wave unscathed. Her lookouts spot the carnage unfolding to the south and sound general quarters. Captain Tomio Kaku races to the bridge, demanding situation reports. Nagumo's fleet, once the pride of the Imperial Navy, is burning on the horizon. Yet Hiryu's decks are clear, her air group largely intact. For now, she is the last hope of retaliation. On Akagi, the order finally comes. Nagumo will transfer his flag. As destroyers close in to take off survivors, the Admiral steps toward the ladder, glancing back one last time at the wall of flame consuming his command. In that moment he knows the tide has turned, and the ambush he sailed to spring has claimed his carriers instead. As Akagi burns uncontrollably, the destroyer Nowaki edges alongside through choking smoke, her crew tossing lines and scrambling nets over the side. Nagumo finally descends the ladder from the shattered bridge, his uniform singed, face streaked with soot. He pauses on the flight deck for one last look, flames roaring through the hangar, secondary explosions ripping holes in the steel as magazines detonate. Sailors leap into the sea rather than face the inferno. Kusaka and Aoki follow close behind, urging the Admiral towards safety. When Nagumo steps aboard the destroyer, he does not speak. He simply stares back at the carrier that has been his home and command for years, now a funeral pyre drifting on the wind. Kaga and Soryu are already doomed. Kaga's fires have reached her fuel tanks. A massive explosion lifts her bow clear of the water before she settles and begins to sink. Soryu, listing heavily, is abandoned in disciplined order, Captain. Yanagimoto's voice calm over the loudspeakers until the end. singing the naval anthem as his ship goes under at 10:45. Only Hiryu remains. Captain Tomeo Kaku receives fragmented radio reports of the catastrophe and immediately signals Nagumo's staff and proceeding to counterattack even before full confirmation. Kaku orders his flight decks cleared and his air group 18 Val dive bombers escorted by 6 Zeros spotted for launch. At 10:50, the first planes roar off Hiryu's deck, climbing into the broken clouds. Their leader, Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi, knows the odds are grim, but vengeance burns hotter than fear. Their target, the American carriers that have just gutted Nagumo's force. Far to the east aboard Yorktown, Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher and Captain Elliot, Buckmaster Watch, returning Dauntless's land with grim satisfaction. 3 Japanese carriers confirmed. Burning, McCluskey's and Leslie's squadrons have struck a blow that will echo through history. But scouts report a 4th enemy carrier still operational. Fletcher, cautious by nature, knows the battle is not over. He turns command of the air operations over to Rear Admiral Raymond. Spruance on Enterprise, preserving Yorktown's remaining aircraft for defense. At 11:55, Hiryu's lookouts spot the American task force. Kobayashi's dive bombers plunge through scattered clouds. Yorktown's radar picks them up late. Her fighters scramble but cannot reach altitude in time. The Vals scream down in tight formation. 4 bombs smash into Yorktown's flight deck, one detonating in the stack, another igniting fires in the hangar. Smoke pours from her guts as damage control parties race below. She slows, listing, but her crew fights back with the stubborn grit that has defined the U.S. Navy since the war began. Aboard the distant Nawaki, Nagumo receives the report of the successful strike on an enemy carrier. For the first time since dawn, a flicker of hope crosses his face. Hiryu is still fighting. The battle can yet be salvaged. Early afternoon, June 4th, aboard the cruiser Nagara, now serving as Nagumo's temporary flagship, the Admiral stands in silence on the open wing of the bridge. The sea behind him is marked by 3 towering columns of black smoke, Akagi, Kaga and Soryu still burning, their crews abandoning ship in orderly lines of boats and rafts. Destroyers circle like mourners, picking up survivors from oil-slicked waters. Nagumo's eyes are fixed on the horizon, where Hiryu disappeared hours ago. Chasing retribution. Radio reports have been encouraging. Yorktown struck hard. Fires raging, possibly crippled. For a fleeting moment, the Admiral allows himself to believe the scales might yet balance. On Hiryu, Captain Kaku wastes no time, even as Kobayashi's strike returns with tales of a burning American carrier. Scouts report the positions of the remaining 2 enemy flat tops. Kaku orders a second wave, 10 Kate torpedo planes under Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, the same hero of the morning. Midway strike, now flying with a damaged fuel tank patched in haste, and 6 Zeros for escort. Tomonaga knows he has barely enough fuel for a one-way trip. He bows deeply to Kaku on the flight deck, salutes, and climbs into his cockpit without a word. At 13:30, the planes launch into a sky scarred with contrails and distant flak. Aboard Enterprise and Hornet, Raymond Spruance remains ice calm. He has already pulled his task force north to widen the distance, refusing to chase the reported 4th carrier. His scouts have found Hiryu instead. At 14:45-24, Dauntless dive bombers, some hastily refueled from Yorktown's surviving squadrons, others from Enterprise, lift off under Lieutenant Earl Gallagher. They climb through broken clouds, searching for the lone Japanese carrier that still dares to fight. Hiryu's radar is primitive. Her lookouts spot the incoming Americans only minutes before the attack. At 17 Ida, the Dauntlesses roll in from high altitude. Anti-aircraft fire stitches the sky, but the dives are steep and accurate. 4 bombs smash into Hiryu's deck, 1 forward, 2 amidships, 1 aft. Fires erupt instantly among the spotted aircraft, waiting for a third. Strike that will never come. A secondary explosion rocks the ship as torpedoes detonate. Captain Kaku is thrown against the bulkhead, blood trickling from his forehead. But he steadies himself and orders full speed ahead. refusing to believe his ship can be lost so quickly. Below decks, damage control parties battle infernos that spread with terrifying speed. Tomonaga's returning torpedo planes circle overhead. Low on fuel, unable to land on a deck now engulfed in flame. One by one, they ditch beside the screening destroyers. Pilots swimming for their lives. Aboard Nagara, the radio operator rushes onto the bridge with the intercepted message from Hiryu. Fire's uncontrollable. Preparing to abandon ship, Nagumo lowers his head for the first time. 4 carriers, his entire striking force gone in a single day. The ambush he had sailed to deliver has become the Imperial Navy's greatest catastrophe. As the sun dips toward the horizon, he whispers to Kusaka, barely audible over the wind. "We have lost the war today." June 5th, 1942 dawn finds the remnants of Nagumo's once mighty fleet scattered across a blood-streaked sea. The cruiser Nagara steams slowly through patches of oil and floating debris. Life. Jackets, shattered aircraft wings, the occasional body bobbing face down in the swell. Nagumo has not slept. He stands on the bridge in the same soot-stained uniform, staring at the final act of the tragedy he commanded. Hiryu's end came in the darkness. After the American dive bombers tore her open, her crew fought the fires for hours. Captain Kaku, wounded but defiant, directed damage control from the bridge until the flames drove him below. At 2:30, with magazines exploding and the ship listing dangerously, the order was given to abandon. Destroyers Kazagumo and Yugumo closed in, their searchlights cutting through the night as hundreds of sailors slid down lines into the water. Kaku remained aboard, bowing to his executive officer before returning to his cabin. Hiryu's bow rose high at 0510. Then she plunged stern first into the depths, taking her captain and dozens of loyal men with her. Far to the northwest, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto receives the cascade of grim reports aboard the super battleship Yamato. The combined fleet commander, architect of the entire Midway operation, sits motionless in his sea cabin as staff officers read the dispatches aloud. All 4 carriers lost, air groups decimated, Midway invasion force turning back. Yamamoto's face betrays nothing, but his chief of staff, Matome Ugaki, sees the admiral's hand tremble slightly as he sets down his teacup. The plan had been flawless on paper. Lure the American carriers into a trap. Destroy them, seize Midway, force Washington to the negotiating table. Instead, American codebreakers had turned the tables, and Yamamoto's precious flat tops, irreplaceable. Jewels of the Navy now lie at the bottom of the Pacific. Yamamoto finally speaks, voice low and steady. "Order all forces to retire at once. We cannot risk further losses." The words are pragmatic, but they carry the weight of defeat. He knows the truth even if he will not yet say it aloud. Japan's offensive power has been broken in a single morning. The initiative has passed to the United States, and the long, grinding war of attrition that Yamamoto always feared has now begun. On Nagara, Nagumo receives Yamamoto's withdrawal order with a silent nod. He turns to Kusaka and says simply, "Prepare a full report for the Emperor." There is no blame in his tone, only exhaustion. In the days to come, he will shoulder responsibility without protest, knowing that history will judge him for those critical minutes of hesitation on the morning of June 4th, as the fleet turns west toward home. The rising sun illuminates a horizon empty of carriers, empty of the pride that once sailed beneath it. June 7th, 1942, the battleship Yamato plows westward through heavy swells, her massive pagoda mast cutting the sky like a monument to faded ambition. Deep in the admiral's cabin, Isoroku Yamamoto sits alone with a single sheet of paper. He has spent the night drafting his official report to Imperial headquarters, each word measured against the truth he now carries like a wound. 4 fleet carriers lost, over 300 aircraft gone, the flower of Japan's naval aviation, pilots trained for years, irreplaceable, wiped out in hours. He sets the pen down and stares at the bulkhead portrait of Emperor Hirohito. The silence is broken only by the distant thrum of engines and the creak of steel. Yamamoto had warned them. In the tense meetings before the operation, He had argued fiercely against overextension, against the belief that one more decisive blow would end the war. If we lose the carriers, he had told the Naval General Staff, we lose the ability to fight offensively for years. They had dismissed his caution as pessimism. Now the truth stares back at him from the casualty lists, 3,057 dead, including some of the finest airmen in the world. And for what? Midway remains in American hands. The invasion force never even approached the atoll. On the cruiser Nagara, Nagumo moves like a ghost among the survivors crammed aboard. Men with bandaged burns and hollow eyes salute as he passes, but he barely acknowledges them. In the wardroom that night, he gathers his remaining staff. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken grief. Kusaka breaks the silence. Admiral, the men need to hear from you. Nagumo looks up slowly, his eyes red-rimmed. What can I tell them? That I hesitated when I should have struck? That I trusted intelligence that was wrong? He pauses, voice dropping to a whisper. I failed them. I failed the Emperor. No one contradicts him. They all know the moments that decided it. The delayed reconnaissance, the indecision over rearming, the fatal exposure of the flight decks. Nagumo will carry that burden to his grave. In the years ahead, he will command again. Land-based air fleets in the Solomons, desperate defenses at Saipan, but the shadow of Midway will never lift. When the time comes in 1944, he will choose death on the battlefield rather than face final defeat. As the fleet steams toward Hashirajima anchorage, the crews line the rails in silence. No bands play, no victory banners fly. Only the wind carries the faint scent of oil and smoke from the east, a reminder of the graves they have left behind. Japan's sailors sense what their leaders already know. The road ahead will be one of retreat, sacrifice, and inevitable reckoning. Years later, in the quiet of post-war reflection, the words spoken in defeat would surface like fragments from a sunken wreck. Nagumo, relieved of command but never court-martialed, carried the silence of Midway to his death on Saipan in 1944, choosing a pistol over surrender. Yamamoto, the strategist who had foreseen the peril, met his end in 1943 over Bougainville, his plane ambushed by American fighters, guided by broken Japanese codes, the same intelligence triumph that had undone him at Midway. But in the immediate aftermath, as the battered fleet limped into Japanese waters in mid-June 1942, the truth was buried beneath layers of necessity. Imperial headquarters announced a great victory. Midway occupied. American carriers sunk, losses minimal. Newspapers blared triumphant headlines. Families of the dead received carefully worded telegrams, speaking of honorable sacrifice in a glorious battle. The crews, who had seen the burning decks, who had pulled oil-soaked comrades from the sea, were ordered to silence. For the sake of national morale, they were told. Yet in private, the admiral spoke plainly. Yamamoto, meeting his staff aboard Yamato upon return, admitted without varnish, "We have suffered a catastrophic defeat. The Americans knew our every move." He confessed to Ugaki in his diary that night, "I am responsible for dragging the Navy into this disaster." Nagumo, in a rare moment of candor to a subordinate, said simply, "When that second report came, 3 enemy carriers, I knew it was over. We had sailed into their trap. The cost was incalculable. 4 irreplaceable fleet carriers, the core of Japan's elite naval air arm, confidence that had sustained. The rapid conquests of 1941-42 shattered in a morning. From that day forward, the Imperial Navy fought on the defensive, yielding island after island, watching its pilot training pipeline collapse while America's industrial might poured forth new ships, new planes, new crews. Midway was never just a battle. It was the hinge on which the Pacific War turned. The moment Japanese admirals looked across smoke-filled bridges and realized, in a heartbeat of cold clarity, that the ambush they had so carefully prepared had become their own undoing, that the rising sun, for all its fierce pride, had reached its zenith and begun its long, inexorable descent. The ocean keeps its secrets, but history does not. What the admiral said in those final moments of shock, of regret, of grim acceptance echoes still as a warning across time. Empires overreach, intelligence fails, hesitation kills, and wars are decided not by plans alone, but by the unforgiving arithmetic of fate. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's pivotal days. The Battle of Midway reminds us how fragile victory can be, and how human decisions in the span of minutes can alter the course of nations.